Patrick Eha. He's going to get us started. He is a journalist who has followed the rise of Bitcoin from its beginnings. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, in The Atlantic, CNN Money, Entrepreneur, Outside, and the LA Review of Books. He's the author of the new book, How Money Got Free, Bitcoin and the Fight for the Future of Finance, and we'll have copies of the book available for sales and signing after the event. All right, Brian, you want to come up and get things started? I can give him a round.
Thanks. All right, thanks for being here, guys. I'm Brian, and I think I'm going to keep this fairly short because I know the real substance of this is going to come in the Q&A first with Tessa, and then when I get to hear whatever questions you might have for me. But I thought it would be good maybe to talk first about how I got into Bitcoin, writing about it as a journalist. So I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011, but I didn't know anybody in the space at the time, and I wasn't really thinking of writing about it as a journalistic subject. And then in the summer of 2012, I was working as a staff writer at CNN Money, and some news appeared, this little news item appeared on Hacker News, and something had leaked out of a Bitcoin startup that was based here in the Flatiron District in New York, and I didn't even know they were there. But it sounded kind of interesting. They were trying to do this debit card that you could load with Bitcoin and then use it like a normal debit card. So it would be a way for you to spend your digital currency in the real world. And I pitched this story to my editor. And I'll never forget when I pitched it, she said, yeah, okay, go and do it, but don't make it out to be more than it is. Bitcoin is just a plaything for crypto anarchists. It's this weird kind of artifact of internet culture, but it's nothing. It's fairy dust. It's tulips. It's whatever. And I didn't really see it that way, but I also didn't have the ammunition to argue against her at the time. So I just kind of said, okay, and I went and did the story. But as I went and did the story, I talked to these guys in their offices, and actually it turned out that some other blogs had picked up the news item from Hacker News, but I was the only one who actually went and met with these guys and tried to dig into the real story. And I remember just being blown away as I talked to them with what they were doing. They were young, they were hungry, they were passionate, they were these kind of Mark Zuckerberg, move fast and break stuff kind of guys. And I was just astonished by how they were sacrificing everything to try to build the early infrastructure of a new economy. And I became convinced that Bitcoin had real potential and could potentially change the world. In fact, the CEO of that startup ended up becoming one of the main characters in my book. Back then, the price of a single Bitcoin, I remember, was less than $10, and the value of all Bitcoins in existence was only $96 million. Today, even with some recent price drops, I think the value of a Bitcoin is about $2,400, and the market cap is somewhere, in the tens of billions of dollars. So I think I made the right choice to take it seriously. Okay, but what is Bitcoin? What is it? How does it work? What makes it worth anything at all? Well, in the simplest terms, Bitcoin is a form of commodity money. When it was first created in January 2009, its original promise was to be a truly universal currency, a form of electronic cash that could be sent around the globe in minutes, and that would work just as well in New York as it did in New Delhi. Transactions were anonymous, or at least were supposed to be, and it all happened on a network that existed independently of any government or bank. The interesting thing to me when I first heard about Bitcoin was I knew that early internet pioneers had always envisioned that a payments protocol would be woven into the fabric of the web. You've got a guy like Peter Thiel who came a bit later, and when he was building PayPal, his original ambition was to create an internet currency that would replace the US dollar for online transactions. And what kept him from doing that was not actually the popping of the dot-com bubble, it was 9/11. And the raft of new financial regulations that came down in the wake of the terrorist attacks, they forced him to pivot away from that because otherwise PayPal would have been accused of money laundering and all sorts of other things. So the brilliant thing that Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, did is he didn't found a new company like PayPal. Instead, he built a decentralized system that no one would own, but anyone could participate in. you'd have this constantly updated copy of the ledger recording all the transactions that would be stored on the computer of anyone on the network, anyone running the open source software of Bitcoin. So it started out as the money of the internet. But gradually, as people began to think about its underlying technology and take a closer look at it, they began to refer to it as the Internet of Money. The technology underlying Bitcoin is called the blockchain. It's basically a tamper-proof ledger for recording and verifying transactions, which admittedly sounds like the least sexy thing in the world. But the revolutionary thing about it is that it allows for transactions to be recorded and verified without the need for a central authority. So normally that would be a payments company like PayPal, or it would be a bank, or it would be a government, or it would be some combination of the two, like the Federal Reserve. But businesses and services with blockchain technology can be decentralized, which simultaneously cuts out middlemen that add cost to the system, and it removes any single points of failure in the system at the same time. And this is disruptive to a lot of businesses. One of the interesting things when I was working on my book was to dig into the international financial system and find out just where Bitcoin could be most useful. One of the biggest areas I discovered was cross-border payments. So basically the way it works today, when banks want to send money across borders, they use what's called the correspondent banking system. A payment might have to make as many as 5 different hops to get to where it's ultimately going across all these different financial institutions and be exchanged from one currency to another. Typically, when a bank wants to send money to another bank across borders, it first has to be holding cash on the at that other institution, and this cash is just kind of dormant. It's dead cash that just sits there waiting until they need to make payments with it. And this is, it's hugely wasteful. That cash isn't doing anything for them until they have to make the payments. And then on the consumer level, you have remittances. This is when immigrants want to send money back to their loved ones in their home countries. They usually use Western Union or MoneyGram today, and they get charged really high fees. So migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, pay an average of 9.81% when they send money home. The global average is 7.45%, which itself is really high, but you might notice there that often the poorest and the people that are suffering the most have to end up paying the highest fees. Well, remittances are a $600 billion market today, and the idea is that Bitcoin, or maybe another digital currency that surpasses it, has a chance to grab a piece of that market while putting billions of dollars back into people's pockets. And today, in fact, there's a venture-backed company called Abra, which is doing just that. It's using Bitcoin to provide cheaper remittances to more than 100 countries. But what people realized was that the things you store and transmit on a blockchain doesn't have to be money. So one of the first guys to realize this was the venture capitalist Mark Andreessen. He wrote an op-ed for the New York Times way back in January 2014, in which he called Bitcoin, not a digital currency, not a form of money. He called it a digital bearer instrument, a way of exchanging assets and confirming their ownership over the internet. Those assets could be digital currency, of course. They could be the titles and deeds to physical property. They could be stocks and bonds. They could be a number of different assets. So this is the reason the world's biggest banks and tech companies are all setting up blockchain labs and working groups and building proofs of concept. This is the reason Bitcoin and blockchain startups have raised something like $1.6 billion of investment capital in the past few years. Their investors include, names you might know, like GV, Goldman Sachs, Visa, Capital One, NASDAQ, and the New York Stock Exchange. Now, if that isn't enough, the interesting thing also is that Bitcoin has actually inspired people to create other cryptocurrencies, some of which have features that arguably make them superior to Bitcoin. And then even more than that, many of the hottest blockchain assets today are not digital currencies at all. They're these things called tokens. They don't have blockchain networks of their own to run on. Instead, they run on top of an existing blockchain network, such as Bitcoin's or Ethereum's, and they tend to be purpose-built for specific applications. So there's one called Golem, which powers or is meant to power a peer-to-peer marketplace for computation. There's one called Augur, which is for a crowdsourced prediction market, and so on. Dozens of these tokens have launched so far. Some of you have probably seen the headlines. They've been raising huge amounts of capital in unbelievably short amounts of time. One raised $10 million in 6 hours. Then another raised, $35 million in 30 seconds. Another raised $150 million in an hour or two. The amount raised now for these software projects through this new token model has actually surpassed the amount of money that's been put in by traditional venture capitalists into this industry so far this year. And that itself is over $200 million, so it's nothing to sneeze at. So dozens of these tokens have been launched and dozens more are on the horizon. And people are starting to think this might yield the second business model of the internet. And to see why, I think it helps to think about what the current business model is, right? So take Facebook. If Facebook had issued a token to its users, its value, we could imagine, would derive from the content and connections that are generated on Facebook. Now, early users, when it was just restricted to college students, there weren't many people on there, they might have been able to kind of scoop up a large number of these tokens at cheap prices. And then later users who kind of jumped on the bandwagon later as the value of the platform became apparent, maybe they'd only be able to afford a few. But all of them, by holding this liquid digital asset, would be able to participate in Facebook's growing success. That, of course, is not how Facebook operates, right? We know that the $450 billion value of Facebook accrues mainly to Mark Zuckerberg and the other shareholders. And most other internet platforms operate in a similar way. Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, even Etsy. The owners of these platforms are not actually producing content themselves, but they extract massive value from the interactions between users. And this has become so common and so accepted that it's actually difficult to imagine a different kind of setup. With decentralized systems based on blockchain tokens, though, there's no longer a division, or no longer such a clear division, at least, between the users and owners. The tokens become a wealth-sharing mechanism, which is a way that everyone, even the average consumers, the average users, can get a piece of the future of the internet. So the token is kind of a unit of account that prices users back in. And it doesn't even end there. In a couple of years, I'm told we can expect to see something called parachains, which is a sort of, think of it as a kind of connective glue that would allow all the different blockchain networks to communicate with each other. So right now they're isolated, but with parachains, applications and smart contracts built on one system would be able to interact with the assets and data on the other systems. So users could flow easily from one to the next, strengthening the whole ecosystem. As long as you're keyed into any cryptocurrency, you'd have access to every cryptocurrency. And because of this, the CEO of a hedge fund recently told me that he expects in 10 years, the total market cap of all blockchain assets will be at least $1 trillion. The last thing I want to say is that the effects of Bitcoin and blockchain technology won't be felt only on the internet or only in the realm of finance. I think Bitcoin actually represents a counterforce to some of the most troubling trends of our time, which is the rising tide of nationalism, populism, trade protectionism, and just all of this stuff that we're seeing in the US, the UK, and across Europe. So until 2016, I think for many of us, the world appeared to be moving inexorably toward open borders, economic inclusion, closer alliances between nations, right? The narrative was that a global citizenry was kind of rejecting the old prejudice of nationalism and tribalism, and history was describing a more and more wonderful arc. Well, then we had Brexit, right? And then we had the election of Donald Trump, and we have the refugee crisis. And that kind of changed our way of thinking. But there is still another story happening at the same time, and I think it's one that many of us are participating in. And it's about how the way that people live and work is changing. It's about the fact that international travel is easier than ever, the fact that technologies like Skype have expanded our reach, the fact that a lot of young people today see themselves more as citizens of the world or of some internet subculture than they do their countries of origin. So the time really is ripe for a universal digital currency and for the other technologies that it makes possible. And Bitcoin is that currency, or is at least the first version of that currency. I noticed while writing my book, and it's still true today, that very few Bitcoin or blockchain startups are focused only on developing nations. And that's to be expected, right? Because cryptocurrency is a tool of international inclusion. Its advocates tend to be committed to open borders and the free flow of people and ideas and capital. Naval Ravikant, the CEO of AngelList, one of the smartest guys in Silicon Valley, he recently said that Bitcoin is a tool for freeing humanity from oligarchs and tyrants dressed up as a get-rich-quick scheme. So I guess the last thought to leave you with is that Bitcoin has implications not just for finance and commerce, but for politics, digital privacy, law enforcement, even citizenship. Its story opens a window onto some of the most important issues of our time. Hopefully we'll get to discuss a few of those now. Thanks.
All right. Can transition over here.
No, I know.
All right, now, everyone keep me honest. So at 2:35, please start lining up at these microphones because I'm going to take your questions. I have a clock here, but keep me honest and line up, please. OK, thank you.
Sure.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about how Bitcoins are made, and they use this word mining. Can you talk a little bit about the process?
Boy, that's kind of deep water. You sure you want to jump in there?
High level.
Yeah, so basically, one of the reasons that before Bitcoin, no one had ever been able to create workable electronic cash was that electronic files can be copied ad infinitum, right? I send a Word document to you, a copy still remains on my computer. So if I have, electronic money on my laptop and I send it to you to spend it, but I get to keep it on my own computer, right? Just like any other electronic data. So this is what's known as the double spending problem. And one of the ways that Satoshi was able to solve that was through what seems at first like a counterintuitive kind of network that was set up. But he basically made the people who are verifying the transactions, they have to apply the processing power of their computers in order to confirm and verify those transactions. And in return for doing that, they're then rewarded with new Bitcoin. So it's kind of a clearinghouse and a central mint all in one, but it's not a central mint, it's decentralized.
But sorry, just to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
These aren't just your average computers, right? Like what kind of computing power are you using?
Well, in the early days they were. So early on you could just do it with your laptop. And then, but what's built into the system is that over time, the mathematical calculations, kind of the numbers you have to crunch in order to confirm transactions and create new Bitcoins, they become harder with time in order to keep up with Moore's law, because obviously computers are a lot more powerful now than they were in 2009. And then on top of that, it was written into the software that the more processing power that's applied, the more difficult they'll become. So they would become more difficult over time anyway, and then also the more people that get involved and try to do this, the more difficult it becomes. So at first, when there were only a few people, you could do it with your GPU, or with your CPU, sorry. Then it became a little more difficult. People started using their GPUs, their graphics processors, to do this. Then even that sort of became insufficient, and people started building ASICs, which are these application-specific processors to mine Bitcoins. And then that kind of, it turned into an arms race. And now you have what are called mining pools, which are basically people with incredibly powerful, sophisticated machines, not even terribly sophisticated, frankly, but just very powerful. And they're all pooling their computing resources together. And then they kind of share in the rewards. Because it's sort of a race to confirm the transactions and then get the Bitcoins every 10 minutes. And as a result, you want as much processing power on your side as possible to try to increase your chances of getting the currency.
And one of my favorite parts about this book, and I really do recommend it, is all these amazing stories. And it doesn't seem like real life. It seems like very cinematic. But one of my favorite ones was about Silk Road. Do you want to just set the scene, talk about the power players, and kind of the lessons learned afterwards?
It's interesting because a lot of people want to think of Silk Road as very much in the past. And in a sense it is. For those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, Silk Road was this underground black market, only accessible through the Tor anonymizing software, and Bitcoins were the only form of money accepted on this underground market. And most of what was bought and sold, not everything on the market was illegal, but most of what was bought and sold on there was illegal drugs, illicit narcotics. And the impact of Silk Road really on Bitcoin can't be overestimated. It started in January 2011. I mentioned Bitcoin started in January 2009. For the first 2 years of its existence, Bitcoin was almost worthless. I mean, in terms of monetary value, the first real transaction we know of with Bitcoins happened on May 22nd, 2010. Someone spent like 25,000 Bitcoins to get somebody in another country to order him a couple of Domino's pizzas online. I mean, 25,000 Bitcoins today is like unbelievable, millions of dollars. But that was just a kind of proof of concept, like, yeah, all right, it works, you can do this, but nobody was really doing it. Well, Silk Road launched, and they said for anonymity, privacy reasons, we're only going to accept Bitcoin. Within a very short amount of time, I mean, just days, the price of one Bitcoin had reached parity with the US dollar and has actually never fallen below it since. I mean, as much as the price has fluctuated, it's always had real worth since then. It's never gone below $1. And so, yeah, I mean, in the early days, Silk Road really formed a huge part of the actual total Bitcoin economy. And then a couple of copycat markets started springing up, and they contributed to it as well. But by the time Silk Road shut down in October 2013, what people eventually realized was, oh, actually, Bitcoin can survive without this. It doesn't rely entirely just on this kind of underground criminal economy. A lot of people had thought, well, that's it. Silk Road's gone. Bitcoin's going to die. That's all it was used for. In many people's minds, those who knew about Bitcoin in those days, that was all it was this kind of criminal currency. And it turned out not to be the case. At the same time, though, the criminal use case for it has not gone away either. There are still a number of these markets that exist today, and people are still using them. But I think I talked to a researcher recently who said it's like, I think, a $500 million a year business or market, he estimated. Which is large, but when you think of Bitcoin's total market cap and the fact that billions of dollars of Bitcoins are trading hands every day pretty much now, it's really not such a big percentage. Yeah.
Great. And for the average person, if I were just today, I wanted to start using Bitcoin, how do I start that process? How do you go about getting a wallet? And I think that it's great because big banks are not involved, but the price of that is that you are responsible for your own protection. And so what measures can the average person take to make sure that their money won't get stolen by hackers?
Well, there actually are some services that will keep your money for you if you want it, and they range from the kind of unreliable to the very, I think, vetted and respectable, and they have various methods of securing your currency. One of them for yourself is to just keep it on an air-gapped hard drive or something like that to keep your digital wallet, not connected to the internet, at least for the vast majority of your holdings. I think to come back to the first part of your question, how to get them, it's actually pretty easy nowadays. I mean, living in the US, there's a company called Coinbase. You sign up for an account. You have to verify your identity the same way you would kind of for if you're opening a bank account. And then you deposit money from your bank through ACH transfer. And it takes 5 days or something like that. But once you have the money in your account, you can buy the Bitcoins. They also let you buy Ether, which is the native token of the Ethereum network. And they let you buy Litecoin, which was the first alternative to Bitcoin, the first kind of altcoin, as they call them, that was created. So it's fairly easy. I mean, for more sophisticated trading, there are a lot of exchanges out there online. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, it's really unbelievable to see these markets in action because they do not have opening and closing bells like the New York stock market. The action is fast and furious and all around the clock. And some of them let you do margin trading. They let you do, market. They let you do a lot of different sophisticated trading strategies. Bitrex is one of them, Bitfinex, Poloniex. They don't all end in X, but Bitstamp, GDAX, there's a number of them. But yeah, Coinbase will give you a kind of simple wallet and buying and selling structure all in one. So.
Great, thank you. So also in the book that you kind of highlighted the growing pains that comes with getting started with Bitcoin. Can we talk a little bit about Mt. Gox? And then, so how pretty much
Sure.
like,
These are
yeah.
such large questions. I'm just like, there's 10 different ways to answer each one of these, so I'm struggling a little bit.
Well,
So
I'm very so
Yeah.
I would be concerned about, you know, if you forget your password, if there's a hack, you can never get your money back. So I guess I'm just curious to hear about what has improved since then, I guess.
Well, I mean, one thing is don't leave all of your holdings on an exchange that's connected to the internet, right? So if you've kind of heavily invested in this stuff and you have $50,000 worth of digital currency, I would encourage you not to leave all of that in a place. I mean, it might seem great to kind of have it all on an exchange so that if the price goes up or down, you want to buy more, you want to sell and make a profit, you can kind of access it instantly. But if the exchange is hacked, if they don't have proper protections, you do run a risk, right?
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to, you know, maybe buy on an exchange, then take most of their holdings, put them offline, make a backup of that wallet. You know, many of these wallets you can get 2FA for. Some of them have what's called multi-sig protection, where you actually need, it's like a 2 of 3 kind of thing. So one person is not able to access the funds completely by themselves, which is an extra layer of protection. There's a number of different security methods, which I honestly find a little bit boring to talk about. But no, it's okay. I'm just kidding. But Mt. Gox was the world's first Bitcoin exchange. These 24-hour online exchanges I'm talking about, Mt. Gox was the first one. It launched in 2010. It was based in Japan. And the problem was, it turned out the guy running it was, you know, not very competent. I remember one of the former employees said it was like running on a spaghetti code base. It was just kind of messed up, and to be honest, they're still untangling what went wrong there. But yeah, either there was an inside job or there were some pretty catastrophic hacks that happened, and it seems like the CEO might have covered that up for a while, and basically let it become catastrophic. Yeah, the same way that, you know, the collapse of Lehman Brothers was catastrophic or something like that, because they kind of hid the problems with their balance sheet for a long time until it became impossible to hide, right? So.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just saying, since those days, there are a lot more vetted, more trustworthy, you know, better run exchanges out there, and many of them are regulated. They have to do AML and KYC compliance, just like a lot of other
Just
regulated
know your
financial
customer
institutions. Right, anti-money laundering, know your customer, and so on. Some of them are based in the U.S., and they have to comply with a lot of regulations today. Yeah.
Great. And so how did you first get involved with Bitcoin? What is it that drew you in? And I thought it was so funny that your editor said, oh, this is this little thing, it's a fad. What was the first sense that you got that this could be something really big? Because you've been researching this for 5+ years now.
Well, like I said, I mean, when I first encountered Bitcoin, it seemed to me like an idea whose time had come, but I didn't know whether it was really going to become huge or not. I thought it had the potential to become big, but you know, I think the easy thing would be to sit here and make myself Nostradamus and say, I always knew it would go up to $3,000 per Bitcoin, and I always knew it would, you know, there'd be billions of dollars of venture capital flowing into the space. I mean, I didn't always know that. What I did know was that I was looking at some very smart guys their minds were just kind of throwing off sparks as I talked to them, and the technology seemed sound. It seemed like something that had never existed before. Some people have criticized it, saying it's a solution in search of a problem, but I don't really find that to be true. From the first time I heard about it, I thought, you know, wow, this is something that no one was ever able to do before. You didn't have, you know, non-counterfeitable digital cash ever before, and you didn't have a way to send money peer-to-peer across borders just without involving, you know, any payments company, any bank, any third party at all. I remember one of the things that stuck out in my mind in the early days was when PayPal and others had instituted a blockade against WikiLeaks. They weren't allowing any of their users to donate to WikiLeaks because of, you know, some of the things it had done involving government secrets.
So the fact that they could control your money like that,
right,
that's the difference here.
So I mean, that might be what you call an edge case, but it is certainly a case, and it was something that stuck in my mind because what people started doing was donating in Bitcoins. WikiLeaks very quickly they found a way to start accepting donations in Bitcoin, and people started donating these digital currencies. And And no one could stop that. No one could forbid that. No one can keep you from sending digital currency to your grandmother in Cuba, even if Trump reinstitutes all of the sanctions against Cuba and so on. And I found that to be really, really fascinating.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. So just 1 minute warning, we'll do one more question, and then if everyone
Sure.
could line up for their questions. So in all the stories that were involved in your book, what is one of your favorites? What is one that you enjoyed the most covering?
Sure. Well, there was this guy named Charlie Shrem. Some of you might have heard about him. He was actually the CEO of that company that I first wrote about for CNN Money. And he was just a middle-class guy living with his parents in Brooklyn when he heard about Bitcoin. He was like 21 years old. And partly through happenstance, partly through sheer will and determination and intelligence, and being in the right place at the right time, he ended up co-founding what became one of the largest, most significant of the early Bitcoin startups. It was actually the first to raise a significant amount of venture capital. It raised $1.5 million in the fall of 2012, which seems like a small amount of money now, but like I said, the market cap of all the Bitcoins in existence back then was only $100 million or less. And at one point, this company was handling 30% of all Bitcoin transactions. They were flowing through BitInstant. And then through, this is kind of spoiler alert for the book, but through some things he got up to, he ended up getting charged and by federal prosecutors and having to spend a year in federal prison. And now he's out and he's actually working on a comeback, which I just wrote about for the July issue of Fortune magazine. But to me, there's a pathos there of this middle-class kid made good, and his ascent to this level where he was clearly, I thought of all the main characters I followed in the book, he was clearly the most gratified by the attention and the respect that he got as a result of his work. And then his fall from grace, and then being kind of disowned by some of the people he had previously rubbed shoulders with, including his investors, and now being out and working on a comeback. So yeah, there's just something there that I find compelling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if any questions in the audience, if you'd like to come and line up now, we can get started.
Yeah, I know that was a bit all over the place. I'm sorry.
That's why you have to read the book. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Arian.
Sure.
So the question I had was, following up everything that's been going on, the way people hold coins, in a sense, is like they're holding stock and not necessarily like they have a piece of currency or value. And I think that's created a lot of volatility in the price of Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these other things, which makes them harder to use as currencies, which is what some of them are meant to be. What do you think needs to happen for that not to be the case? Because when people buy real currency, non-cryptocurrencies, they're used a lot more than Bitcoin is, and some people are just holding Bitcoin for the sake of holding it. So I guess the question is, what do you think needs to happen to create more stability in the cryptocurrency market versus volatility?
To be honest, I think there are different schools of thought about this, right? A traditional economist would look at it and say, how can these be currencies when their value fluctuates so much they can't be used as a stable unit of account? Basically the three qualities that make something a currency typically are that it's a store of value, which Bitcoin certainly is. You're talking about people trying to use it as a store of value, right? It's a unit of exchange, which Bitcoin is. It can be used to buy goods and services or sent peer-to-peer. But then the third is that it's a unit of account. And that is one that Bitcoin's not really used for that today. And it's partly because the price is so volatile. But there's another school of thought that says actually the volatility is okay, the speculation is okay, because before Bitcoin can become a truly global currency that can really serve a huge global user base. And it's worth mentioning that a month or two ago, a study out of Cambridge University found that the number of people now using cryptocurrencies worldwide rivals the population of small countries. So that's pretty impressive. But even that, it's not a giant global user base, right? But they say right now the market cap of Bitcoin's in the 30 billions or about 40 billion or something like that. Its market cap needs to be much higher, I think, before it can serve a truly global user base. It needs to be, maybe even 10 times higher. when you compare it to the amount of US dollars that are out there, for instance. So actually the speculation is okay. The fact that some people are hoarding it might be okay, because if it makes it more valuable, if it makes it kind of, more scarce, and that drives the price up, that might be when we see its function as a currency start to really come to the fore. The other answer to your question is that there are actually technological kind of solutions to the volatility that allow it to still be used as a currency. So for instance, merchant payment processors who exist in the Bitcoin industry today, they are willing to take on that volatility risk on behalf of the merchant. So if you have Bitcoins and you want to use them to buy bed sheets or something like that from overstock.com, and they do accept Bitcoins, you will send the Bitcoins to Overstock, but Overstock actually won't be exposed to the volatility risk. They don't handle the Bitcoins themselves. It gets accepted for them by their merchant, payment provider, which I believe for them is Coinbase, or it might be a company called BitPay. That company then will exchange the currency for them almost immediately and give them the cash that they want to keep as their unit of account for their bookkeeping. And you're happy because you got to spend your digital currency the way you wanted to. The merchant is happy because they got the US dollars, and the merchant services provider is happy because they made a little percentage on that transaction. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I was curious to see what your thoughts on the flippening are, and where you see like the Bitcoin versus Ether debate going, and what maybe the advantages and disadvantages for the two are.
Yeah, I mean, so really big question. What he's talking about is the idea that some people have that Ethereum is going to overtake Bitcoin in terms of its market cap, in terms of its just overall use case, that maybe there aren't that many things Bitcoin can do that Ethereum can't do. Ethereum right now is the world's second biggest cryptocurrency by market cap, by number of users, and so on. As a journalist, I like to, I kind of cherish the fact that I can be somewhat of an observer and not have to take a very partisan side, because there are a lot of partisans right now in the cryptocurrency space, and you can talk to one guy and he'll swear up and down that Ethereum is practically a scam and that there's no reason you should use anything but Bitcoin. And then there are other people who say Ethereum's more sophisticated than Bitcoin. And I think they somewhat have different use cases. And I do think that Bitcoin today still has an incredibly strong first mover advantage. It has kind of an unparalleled network effect, unparalleled name recognition. If I go to the average person and I say, have you heard of Bitcoin? They might not know anything about it, but they might say, yeah, that sounds familiar. But if I say, do you know what Ethereum is? They're gonna probably say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, that is one of the first obstacles Ethereum would have to overcome. I think we know from the technology space that in order for one service or one product to overtake a rival one, it can't just be 10% better, right? It needs to be twice as good or 5 times as good sometimes. And I'm not sure for most people Ethereum fits those qualifications right now, especially, Bitcoin right now is having some trouble scaling the network up to serve a global user base. Transactions are taking longer, they're kind of becoming more costly, and so on. And the transactions themselves are instantaneous, but the time it takes to confirm the transactions on the network to verify that they're valid, that's taking longer. So some people were saying, oh yeah, Bitcoin is becoming a stick in the mud. All those people, the competing stakeholders in the Bitcoin system, they can't work out their differences. They can't come to agreement on a proposal for how to upgrade the software and move forward to scale the network. So obviously Ethereum is just going to eat its lunch. But we just this past week saw some problems with the Ethereum network where transactions were getting clogged and there were some issues. So I think that took the wind out of the sails of a lot of people that previously had thought it's just clear sailing for Ethereum from here on out. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, great to have you here.
Sure.
Such an astonishing 5 years in the crypto world, and it's all very exciting with distributed applications and so on. But as you know, Mike Hearn is probably the most famous Googler that advocated for Bitcoin and joined Bitcoin Core, and he quit because of infighting and debates over the direction it should take. Given the amount of trust that has to be placed in the developers for these different coins, and the amount of infighting that goes on,
yeah.
Are we still kind of blocked on some kind of governance solution to actually make these kinds of things successful?
Well, that's where some of the alternatives to Bitcoin become potentially interesting. There's one called Dash, which some people think, in terms of its innovations as, a form of digital cash or cryptocurrency or whatever, it might not be, a huge improvement over Bitcoin. What's really interesting about it is its innovation in the governance model. So with Dash, basically, the network kind of administrators, in a sense, are people running these things called master nodes. And in order to run a master node, you have to own at least 1,000 Dash. So you have to be very much a stakeholder in the network. And then proposals for, doing marketing for the network, proposals to upgrade the software, add new features, or any number of things, they all kind of, on a monthly basis, get put up for a vote by all of the people running master nodes. Now, it's still a decentralized system. In fact, many of the people running master nodes, it's not even known who they are exactly. And one individual could run, theoretically, more than one master node. But there are thousands of master nodes right now on the network. And even the development team for Dash is actually beholden to their approval, because the way Dash works is that some of the new Dash coins, if you want to call them that are created every month, they actually get allocated as funding for the developers to pay the developer talent and so on, to keep working on the system, improving it, and so on. But they have to actually propose to the stakeholders of the network, this is what we'd like to do, and then there's a democratic process in which that gets voted on, and sometimes their proposals don't pass. But it's a way to kind of keep the developers honest and keep the interests, I think, of all the different stakeholders in the network aligned. The developers rely on them for their funding. At the same time, the stakeholders rely on the developers in order to keep the network, going strong, and which makes their Dash coins valuable and incentivizes them to run the master nodes in the first place, and so on. So that, to me, is a really interesting governance model. I don't know whether Dash will, one day replace Bitcoin for that reason or something, but people are starting to innovate, not just on aspects of the technology itself, but on aspects of the way that these decentralized networks are governed. And Bitcoin is very much kind of the 1.0. It's had to go through all these growing pains, and people didn't know how this stuff would work until they had to do it. But as one guy put it to me recently, the nice thing about Bitcoin is it is going through all these growing pains. And so it is becoming kind of more trusted, in a sense, simply because it has shown its resilience despite, scandals, despite the hacks of Bitcoin exchanges, despite some Bitcoin startups failing, and so on.
Hey there, my name's Nick.
Hey.
So my question's around the Ethereum network and, really the speculation around moving to a proof of stakes concept. So I guess the question is that what's stopping big players from entering the game at that point in a proof of stakes network or proof of stakes concept, and then taking a large market share on the computing power, essentially removing maybe the concept of decentralized network? Or is that not even a problem at all?
Well, to be honest, I'm not as much of an expert on the underpinnings of the Ethereum network, as I don't know quite as much about the proof of stake system and how all of that is handled as I do about the proof of work system that Bitcoin uses. But yeah, I think people do have concerns that some of the power in the Ethereum network is already concentrated in too few hands. That's, the fact that the network forked last year and essentially split into two versions. You have what they call Ethereum, but it's actually kind of the new Ethereum, and then you have what they call Ethereum Classic, which is the original network. And that happened because there was a big sort of hack and theft of this one investment vehicle that was running on the Ethereum network, and millions of dollars worth of Ether were stolen from it. And so kind of the top leaders of the Ethereum network, including its the guy mostly credited as its creator, this guy named Vitalik Buterin, they decided, okay, we're gonna sort of roll this back and make it so that this thief doesn't profit from his ill-gotten gains. But the way to do that in a blockchain network is that you basically have to fork the network. And if everyone had kind of agreed, then maybe they would have all moved over to the new network. But some didn't. And some people decided to continue putting developing resources and time and effort into the original network. And so now you have actually two different networks. One, which has stayed sort of immutable and no transactions have ever been rolled back. And then this new one that actually today is much more valuable in terms of its market cap, but which some people think is, really not so trustworthy because it's possible that some of these big stakeholders, at any time they don't like something, they might choose to, undo it. And the only thing, in a sense, stopping them from doing that, well, maybe not the only thing, but the main thing is that the main thing people are relying on is they kind of just say, well, we won't, right? Another issue that I have with Ethereum is that I think it's a bit more of a, I don't want to say exactly a cult of personality, but there is a bit of a cult of personality around this guy, Vitalik Buterin, who's incredibly young. I mean, clearly brilliant. I mean, a real genius. But this really young guy who is known as the creator of it and co-founder of it. And 4chan actually perpetrated a hoax on Sunday night that Vitalik Buterin had died. And almost instantly, $4 billion were wiped off the market cap of Ethereum because people said, whereas with Bitcoin, the creator, this guy whose identity is still not known, Satoshi Nakamoto, after the first couple of years of working on the system alongside other developers he had recruited, he walked away and just kind of vanished into the night. And Bitcoin has continued to thrive after that. I think that was one of the last brilliant things he did, was that he chose to walk away from it to see if it could stand on its own, to not let it be a cult of personality, to not constantly have people just, going to him as the Oracle of Delphi to make every decision for them. Ethereum still needs to take those training wheels off in a sense. And Vitalik has said, to his credit, that he'd like to take a step back at some point. But that hasn't really happened yet, so.
Right.
Hey there. First of all, I love that Naval quote, so thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Hoping you can touch upon your opinion on the block size debate that's currently going on.
Yeah, no, I don't have a super strong opinion on that. I mean, it gets really technical, and there are these different competing proposals for how the network should be scaled up, as I said, to meet the needs of a growing user base. Basically, transactions, the reason it's called a blockchain network is that transactions are processed and put into blocks, these kind of batches, and every 10 minutes, approximately, a new block is created and it's added to the existing blockchain. So you have this immutable ledger that records every transaction going back to January 2009, in this giant decentralized ledger that you can think of as a chain. But the problem is that these blocks only have a certain capacity. Each block can only hold a certain number of transactions. And as the network has gotten bigger and bigger, as there have been more and more transactions, whether it be, spending it as currency or trading activity or what have you, those blocks have been they've gotten full, basically. And although, as I said, the transactions themselves are still happening instantaneously, the time it's taking for miners to take new transactions, confirm them, verify that they're valid, and thus add them to new blocks that can be added to the overall blockchain, it's taking longer. There's been basically this slowdown. And so there are different proposals. Some people are saying, well, let's make the blocks twice as big as they currently are, okay? Let's make them 4 times as big as they currently are. Let's do this other thing and make them twice as big as they currently are, And there's all this stuff. One of the concerns about making the blocks bigger is that then the size, the data storage size of the overall blockchain will become much, much bigger. And it'll be much harder for kind of smaller operators to still participate in the network, which could potentially concentrate power in fewer hands on the network. I think that's one of the concerns. And then there are other concerns, if you can call them that, like the fact that the way right now to get the miners to confirm your transactions faster, if you really need them to be confirmed quickly, is you pay them a little mining fee, a little transaction fee, basically. Now, some people think this is a real problem. Over the last couple of years, we're seeing these transaction fees get higher. It used to be that Bitcoin transactions were almost costless, and that was one of their advantages over things like, using credit cards or other, Western Union and so on. But if these transaction fees are going to keep climbing, then, that seems to take away at least part of Bitcoin's advantage, right? But on the other hand, the mining pools, some of the big mining pools in China, for instance, they seem to like these transaction fees just fine for obvious reasons. And so there is a bit of a battle. I mean, there are some developers, there are some Bitcoin companies, other stakeholders that have kind of agreed on certain proposals. And then there are others that are holding out against them. And, in many cases, it's the miners. And the difficulty there is that the developers can create whatever version of the software they want. They can all agree, this is what we need to do. This is the best version of the software. A lot of the Bitcoin entrepreneurs and companies and investors can agree. But in order to actually move to that version of the network, you need to get at least 51% of the total processing power on the network to agree to start running that version of the software. You need a majority to agree. So that has been, if you want to call it, holding back some of the progress in the network. On the other hand, it's kind of great that you have a system that can't be easily changed, right? It's almost like the political system of the United States, that like sometimes the gridlock is not a bug, it's a feature, because otherwise each new administration that comes in could just completely undo everything and just wipe the slate clean, right? So this is one of the potential advantages of new cryptocurrencies, is that they might be a little more nimble, they might be more agile, they might have better governance systems in some sense. But it could be that Bitcoin will take on this kind of elder statesman role, where it out of all these assets, it becomes kind of the most stable and trusted, the one that's least subject to change. And it might turn out to be a little bit of a tortoise compared to the hare of the others, but sometimes you want a tortoise. So.
All right, well, thank you. So we're running out of time. If you still have questions, you can meet us over by the book signing table, and then we can still take them over there. Thank you so much, Brian.
Sure.
Thank you for coming in. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great.